viewpoints and beliefs presented on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the management, the affiliates and broadcast partners, or the sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Scarefest Radio, the radio you can see.
Probably 30,000 and change now.
All right, you can shut up now, Charlie. We're on there. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scarefest Television. I'm your host, Wes Forsyth. The July 26th, 2024. That is today's date when we're going out live. And you'll notice that I've updated my studio a little bit. I got me a new mic boom so that now you can tell the thing is not just a little black ball floating above my head. It actually looks like a microphone. My co-host this evening is Mr. Chad Harlan. Chad?
Good evening.
Where you been, buddy?
I spent part of the week in Montana and a whole lot of the week in airports.
So, and of course tonight we do welcome Charles Romans back to the show.
Good to be back.
Charles hosts the Shadows of Legend podcast, and he'll be telling about his seminar thing, which is attachments, haunted places versus haunted people. We have an announcement tonight. We have a celebrity announcement tonight. Just as I thought we were going to have two, but we're double checking someone's schedule to make sure we didn't, nothing got jacked up. And, and Joe Lewis will be reviewing Satanic Hispanics tonight. It's Satanic Hispanics. So we got that going on. So that's what we got, people. That's what we got.
Well,
welcome again, Charlie. Now, everybody, okay, here's the blurb on Charles's podcast. I want to quality work here. I'm going to talk about how I could not do what he does. But
he's a very good liar, by the way. So
no, I could not. It's real stories of the strange and paranormal encounters in the words of those who have experienced them. I've been listening to his podcast. I hit it every now and then, but now I did listen. I do my homework for the show, Charlie. First question is, how long does it take you to write that little blurb you put at the beginning of every damned episode? He doesn't come here and fly by the seat of his pants like moi. He actually writes his Shakespearean tragedy fucking 2 sentences, paragraph, whatever, to lead every guest onto his show.
Well, see, I grew up reading these wonderful stories written by people like H.P. Lovecraft and, of course, Stephen King and a host of others. And this is my nod to trying to set the stage. And of course, I think I have always wanted to be Rod Serling when I grew up. So as I'm trying to into that, right? But once the podcast starts, really, I tell people before we start recording, this is your show. I want you to tell me your story in your words. I'll ask maybe clarifying questions or for some pertinent information, but I really want you to give me the story as you experienced it.
And you do
the
it
beginning and the end.
Seriously, you do it extremely well. I just remember when I did my audio podcast, I had trouble just coming up with an introduction for my guests, let alone something that was freaking poetry. Sounds like a Civil War soldier's love letter home. But anyway, that part's great. I enjoy it. Now on the guest, this is kind of a follow up to what you just said.
Right.
Your presence is minimal. I will grant you that. Unlike me, who just talks over everybody. Now, but how often does it become a problem dragging the guest out for the full length of the show?
Well, there are times when you start and people say, well, this is just a really short story. But what happens is, and I learned this in my career as a reporter too. If you walk up and you just start firing questions at people, they clam up. You may or may not get an answer. But if you get people to talking and sharing information, they will answer questions you never even thought to ask. So what I do, people will say, "Well, it's a very short story. I'm just tell it." And as they start telling something, something will occur to me that maybe part of the audience wouldn't grasp because they have no experience with it. So I'll stop and ask a clarifying question. Well, that sparks more conversation because then it makes them actually remember more of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into these thinking this is going to be 10 or 15 minutes, and it's actually been an hour and 15 minutes.
Well,
it's actually easier than you think.
See, because in my case, I got it easy because if I happen to know or can dig out of them what their actual passion is, when you're talking to celebrities and you find out like, oh, they love dogs. Hey, steer it towards the dogs, they'll talk your ear off. But when you're talking about with interviewing someone about a very specific story, I'm just, once again, kudos to you. I don't think I can do it. Now, the other thing I want to ask you is, how do you get the leads on these stories? Because I know when I was booking paranormal filler and doing Scarefest TV, it's almost a full-time job, and I've got the whole world of celebrities and speakers, and in other words, I'm focused, but I have it's hard. Now you're asking people to come on your show, and people hate fans. These are not celebrity interviews for the most part. These are real everyday people. How do you find those real everyday people?
Well, I mean, a short answer is, and it sounds kind of, like I'm sandbagging, but you have to look. People gravitate toward other people that have similar experiences. So you start looking on these paranormal groups. People want to share like Bigfoot pages and things of that nature, UFO pages. And people will start sharing their stories. And you start talking to them, and then if you think that the story would be interesting, and a lot of it is if you think that person would be inclined to talk more about it, then you reach out to him. You say, "Hey, this is my podcast," and I always lead with, "Okay, here's the link. Listen to a couple of them, and make sure that you think you would like to talk to me. And if you think you want to talk to me, there's the information. I'd love to have you on the podcast." And so far, I've been really fortunate because people have been kind enough to come on and share their stories, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
Chad, over to you.
Charlie, it's great to talk to you. I'm been looking forward to this. I do enjoy your podcast, and I've been listening to it for a while. I listen to quite a few podcasts, and what I like, Wes kind of mentioned it. What I like about yours is that you're not finding authors and experts. You're talking to real people about the stories that happen to them. And I find that a refreshing and interesting perspective to hear.
Well, thank you. And I believe so as well because, I referenced Stephen King earlier. You expect Stephen King to be scary. When you talk to someone down the street or down the block or a friend of a friend and they share something, well, okay, then this is when it gets real. This is not a made-up story. What happened to you? I would love to hear your story. And as important as that, I want to share the story because what I've found in this community, people that have had the actual experiences, they hesitate to say anything because the first thing that happens is people start telling them they're crazy. And then they stub up and they won't share it. And if it's a particularly traumatic experience, then it just may eat them up for 20 years. But if they share a story and then somebody says, something similar like that happened to me, and they can talk to one another about it, then I think that's much more interesting than just reading a scary story. Now, don't get me wrong, I love scary movies, and I love scary novels, but there's something to me that's uniquely terrifying about normal people experiencing paranormal things.
And like you said, it normalizes it for other people out there, is hearing that the person down the street or in the next county over had a similar experience, really brings it home that you're not crazy for what's happened to you, and it's worth talking to people to share your experience and talk and find out what's happening with others. But I kind of have like to touch base with, how did you find the paranormal? What's your background? What's your history? What drew you to doing a paranormal podcast as opposed to, I don't know, sports updates?
Well, I'm interested in a great number of things. I grew up reading folklore, mythology, science fiction, fantasy, and of course, watching all the movies and everything. But there seems to be a unique connection with the paranormal. I know that my grandfather, actually both of my grandfathers, but my mother's father specifically, he was an odd duck. He had a lot of strange stories. And I remember thinking to myself, if a fraction of what he's telling me is accurate, then there's some really amazing and horrifying things going on out there. In my first episode of the podcast, Welcome to the Shadows, I have to apologize because I'm trying to do his voice, and I really didn't do his voice justice. But I remember there was this hill behind the house. When I would go up on the hill every chance I got, and Grandpa would catch me, and he'd say, "Stay out from under them trees," and run me off the hill. And he told me the story about running into a dog that had rabies, is what he called it. But later on in life, I'm thinking, what did he really see? So I had that connection at an early age. And where I'm from, well, I'll give you a perfect example. Everybody has a ghost story, a story of the strange and the paranormal. I asked, when I first started doing this, I asked a friend of mine who was a doctorate in divinity. I said, "So what's your take on ghosts?" And he laughed. He said, "The company line is ghosts aren't real. But let me tell you what happened to me." So here's a person with a doctorate in divinity telling me a ghost story. So it seems to me that there's that germ of truth, that connection, and so many people have told these stories. There has to be something to it.
I think that, especially being a Kentucky-based podcast, that rings true for a lot of us. I grew up hearing about the haints and the boogers up in the hill.
Oh, yeah.
And that's really what drove me into being interested in finding out, what's behind those stories. How much of it's folklore versus how much of it was real events. And it's just such a rich history in this part of the country, and I know people are drawn to it.
Well, I mean, it is because it's a different perspective. I walk outside sometimes at my home. Now I live in Greenup County, but I grew up in Bowie County. But during the day, there's noise in the road. But after about 11 o'clock at night, especially when it's foggy, you step out on my front porch, it's like stepping into one of those old Hammer films, or the old Wolfman with Lon Chaney. What was the fake area they had there? They called it Visaria. It was like stepping out into that. And then all the noises, everything changes. So, and I'm not an exceptionally twitchy person, but you can feel stuff out there that's not out there during the day.
We'll be right back with Charlie Romans, and we're going to take our first break.
The Bombs is a 2024 Scarefest weekend sponsoring vendor. The Bombs makes bath and body products for everyone. Ashley Dobbs makes unique small batch hand-painted bath bombs, plus sugar scrubs, whip soaps, and body oils. Find the Bombs on Facebook and at the monthly Central Kentucky Mystical Market in Lexington. Scarefest weekend sponsoring vendors make the event happen. Be sure to tell them that you heard it here on Scarefest TV.
Tuesday's Crypt features deals with talents in the horror community, from mask makers, sculptors, artists, and more. Plus, podcast Live in the Crypt, shooting the shiz with DK and the Swag, and DK and the Bees, Horror Buzz. Visit their website, join their Facebook group and thank them for being a Scarefest sponsoring vendor.
Hey everybody, welcome back. You're watching the Scarefest TV podcast network. That's going to be a thing. That's going to be a thing real soon. Our guest tonight is Charles Romans, and he's presenting at Scarefest. He's talking about attachments. We're going to get to that here in just a minute. I did have a couple more questions.
Sure.
On your podcast, just kind of, everybody, if you want to play the home version, shadowsoflegend.com. Good URL, by the way.
Thank you.
Nice, easy to remember URL, easy to spell. And that's something that just irks me about some people. But anyway, I want to ask, do you get, because you're in Kentucky, do Kentucky stories fall in your lap more, or do you really feel like you get a good widespread?
Well, I get a pretty good sampling across the world. I mean, I have a lot of people calling from Canada. I've interviewed people from Australia, Great Britain, a lot of different places. I interviewed a gentleman who was originally from Russia, but at the time he was living in Michigan. Very interesting gentleman who discussed the difference between Russian Bigfoot and American Bigfoot. Apparently, American Bigfoot are much more violent. But very good episode. Yeah, well, yeah. Well, it's just like when I talked to the guys from Mountain Monsters. They were had got called into the way back in the middle of nowhere. Said, look, we're from the hills, and we were scared to go back there. And he said these guys said Bigfoot was tearing up their still, and they said, who knew it? But Bigfoot's a mean drunk. I mean, it weighs about 1,000 pounds, and you fill it full of corn liquor. How could it not be an engine of destruction? I mean, it's just...
Canadian Bigfoot will say thank you. Anyway, okay. Now, I think you kind of hinted before we were talking before the show. This is probably just gonna be a no answer, and we'll move on.
Okay.
And I wouldn't even begin to ask you about the story or dropping any names too much. But have you ever had anybody come on your show that once they started talking, I'm not saying you acknowledged it on the air, but have you ever just said, wow, this person is just so far out there, I can't even see them from where I'm sitting?
Well, apparently you think I'm much more grounded than I really am, Wes. But no, you see, the thing of it is, I try to go into this with an open mind. Some of it is, I admit, some of it's a little far from my area of experience. And the reason I say that is because our experiences is what colors our thoughts. Okay. So, whereas I may be less inclined to think something's possible, doesn't mean it's not. But no, I never really wanted to end the recording and apologize to my audience or anything like that. But no one's ever been that outlandish.
You're still a child in the field, and you're still a child in the field. Okay. Now, of the stories, though, okay. Of the stories that you've done, does one or two stand out in your mind as, I'll use the word freaked you out, but just left the most impression on you?
Well, one that completely stunned me actually was a Bigfoot story. I was interviewing a gentleman from, he's an Inuit, and he from up in Canada, and he said that he was hunting above the tree line, and he was hunting caribou with a high-powered rifle. And he had shot a caribou. And of course, when you shoot something out of a herd, the rest of the herd stampedes, right? So he's starting to clean this caribou, and he hears some noises. So he picks up his binoculars and he looks, and the herd of caribou is running back toward him, which is unheard of. Well, then he looks behind him and he sees this creature that has to be Bigfoot chasing this herd of caribou. And it's gaining on them. It's catching up with them. And he knows that it's going to overtake a herd of caribou in full flight. Now, before that story, I had always thought of Bigfoot in terms of, trees and mountains, stuff like that. And then they move fast because they're a big, strong creature. But it occurred to me when he said it was like almost like an epiphany, because I'm thinking, oh my God, the size of this thing, if you gave it unlimited space to run, how fast could it run? And then the telling part, the finishing off this guy said it scared me so bad. he pulled his binoculars away. He didn't want to see him, the creature, catch them. And he put his gun on his four-wheeler, left the deer he'd shot there, the caribou, and got out of there. Now, this is a grown man who's a hunter, who admits to me and everyone listening that he was so terrified that running away, he was crying. And that whole imagery just stunned me, both because of the new information and because there had to be something truly terrifying for a grown man to admit to a total stranger that he was crying openly.
See, now that begs this whole other piece of information. Was Bigfoot chasing them out of fun, or does Bigfoot eat caribou? And that's the scary part to me.
Yes. Well, in an earlier episode, I had interviewed a gentleman named Doug Waller, who's written 5 books on Bigfoot, and reported to him this truck driver is going through this country road in the middle of the night, and he sees some deer run across the road, so he slows down because, you're always looking for the extra deer.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Because there's always a straggler. Well, as he's slowing down, they come running back across the road in front of him again, and this creature he describes as Bigfoot is chasing them, and it's running on all fours. And 2 of them shoot off, and one of them separates, and Bigfoot follows the one that separates. And the guy he knew he was going to catch it. He just didn't want to see it. So it's so apparently Bigfoot is a carnivore, or possibly Bigfoot's a lot like me. I'm an omnivore. I'll eat almost anything. Yeah. So,
Chad.
But yeah, so that's good.
Well, I'm building on that after hearing all these stories and talking to so many different people. Have your views on the paranormal changed through these interviews?
Well, not so much changed as been confirmed, because I remember even as a child reading all these stories and all these accounts from all over the globe that I'm thinking, okay, and we'll use Bigfoot for an example because it's easy. Okay. The people in the Himalayas 2,000 years ago are reporting seeing a giant hairy hominid. At the same time, the peoples of North America are reporting seeing a giant hairy hominid. Okay. This was long before instant messenger, emails, or even snail mail. I mean, there was no communication between these two populations. And when the two populations finally connected, the stories were already there. So that leads me to believe there's a small germ of truth, at least. And it can't all be superstitious peasants. And on that subject, we were too quick to say, oh, that's just superstition, and brush it off. Science has a tendency to do that for anything it can't readily prove. So I think we need to get better science, because I think there was something to it.
Well, certainly. I mean, we see time and time again where the species that's been extinct is discovered. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many theories out there on ghost and Bigfoot, such as multi-dimensional time slips versus actual disincarnate spirit. So I'm just always interested to hear people's perspective, and the longer they're in this field, how their thoughts or ideas have evolved.
Well, I share this with people all the time. When I was young, we're talking grade school, middle school, I remember reading about Ireland and the myths surrounding Ireland. How the Tuatha De Danann and the elves arrived at Isle of Ireland. And wonderful story, fantastic story. And then years later, after all the other information I had gathered, I'm starting to think, that sounds suspiciously like an alien invasion. And the ancient people used to describe things. Everything had its own realm and its own world. You had the dream world. You had the realm of the living, the realm of the dead. And all of these realms were separated by veils. On certain times of the year or under certain conditions, you could pierce that veil and see into the other dimension, and possibly these dimensions could coexist briefly. Well, this is all well and good, and modern man seemed to think that that was just superstition for people that didn't understand things. And then within the last 20 years, we've come up with this wonderful thing called quantum physics. And quantum physics postulates the existence of the multiverse, which would explain the veils between existence. So, new knowledge. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, new knowledge doesn't have to throw the old knowledge out. It should explain it and deepen it. And I think if you pay it attention, that it will. And you can check all the boxes, connect all the dots eventually.
I think what I've always found is if you peel back just a couple layers of cultural influence, there's such a common thread running through so many areas or so many different cultures that these entities and experiences are very similar. Now, everybody, especially before we were all connected 24 hours a day by cell phone and internet, puts a cultural filter on it. So, where you hear stories of little people from all over the world, in Ireland, they became leprechauns. Mm-hmm. In other places, they became brownies and other types of creatures. So, but if you peel a little bit back, they're very similar stories. And like you said with the Bigfoot stories, it just seems unlikely that they would have made that out of whole cloth in all these different places without any real connection at that time.
Right. We see it's like the legend of weres. Of course, now the most famous one is the werewolf. Okay. Human who turns into a wolf. Well, in Asia, you have were-tigers. In Japan, you have were-foxes and things like that. It's not surprising that they choose the apex predator of the area to be the, quote, bad guy. But why was there ever any thought that people could change into animals? Where did that come from? So when that happens duplicated through so many cultures, it makes you wonder if that wasn't a thing. Or if there were offshoots, like strains of animals that developed with a certain degree of intelligence that, we'll say mimicked humans, because I don't want to go completely on left field, but it's possible that could have been confused for that.
Yeah, and you've touched on it too. There's always the idea of, I know there's stories of aliens appearing as owls and deer throughout all the lore on those. So is it a situation where some other entity came here and adopted a visage that would be comfortable for the people around them, and that turned into transforming from a man to an animal?
Exactly, yes. And then people telling the stories may do the same thing as well. I had a gentleman who's not been on the podcast yet, but I'm working on him because he's very intelligent. You can tell he's done his research. He asked me one question. He said, have you had people, a lot of people report encounters with beings with wings? I said, well, other than things like the Mothman, not exceptionally so. And he had the idea that, well, maybe ancient people, when they were doing their pictographs and everything, they depicted these creatures with wings because they were trying to explain to other people how they could fly. And maybe these creatures were actually aliens. So, and not having been there, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So, not having been there, you don't know for sure. And you don't know if people are either explaining it clearly enough or whether we're understanding clearly enough.
Exactly. Right now, we're ready for our next break. We're going to toss it over to the commercials, and we'll be right back with Charles Romans from Shadows of Legend.
Are you a fan of horror movies, books, comics, music, and collectibles? Roomorg Magazine is for you. Subscribe today to receive 6 or 12 print issues annually and join me, executive editor Andrea Subissati, on an ongoing journey through the horror genre of the past, present, and future. Plus, get access to unmissable special editions such as A Century of Witches, 50 Years of Gore Cinema, British horror movies, and so much more. Rue Morgue, the world's premier horror and culture and entertainment magazine since 1997. Accept no substitute.
Okay, here's a scoop for you. These go on sale tonight. Our souvenir masks that you can get signed at the Scarefest become mounted or unmounted. But we've had these special masks made. Madrian, I'm sure, will tell you all about it in the post tonight. But watch for that announcement coming out on the Facebook group and on the Facebook page tonight. Our number one requested event is back. You people said you wanted a ghost hunt. We did a poll. What after-hours activities would you like to see? Ghost hunt, a celebrity ghost hunt, won hands down. Those tickets are now on sale, and they are selling quite briskly, the way I'm told, as I've been told. So anyway, the ghost hunt tickets are on sale. So we wanted to bring that to your attention if you were not aware. We have our first announcement for Scarefest Inc. We are posting our first of our tattoo artists, Terry Rippey. And by the way, that's High Tide Tattoo. But by the way, he's already booked out for Saturday and Sunday, completely full. So if you know Terry and you want to get with Terry, Friday's going to be your day. Now our celebrity announcement. We have Jeff Daniel Phillips. Jeff Daniel Phillips, of course, 3 from Hell. Also, The Munsters, 31. Lords of Salem. Devil's Rejects. Christmas, Bloody Christmas. Oh my God, this man's been in everything. Jeff Daniel Phillips is booked for Scarefest 2024. The Scarefest Horror Film Festival. We are at 85 movies right now, people. I've been watching some movies this week. 85 entries, and we're still a month out. We've still got August to go. So it's going to be a heck of a film festival. We're going to pick the 20 or so best for you, but we've got plenty to choose from. If you have an independent film or you know an independent filmmaker, the deadline is approaching. Tomorrow, I run my next 5K. This will be interesting because I have done zero training because it got hot and I got busy. And then by the time it was time it cooled down enough to train, I just didn't do it. But it is at the Coldstream Park. That's what they call it, isn't it? Coldstream Park. Tomorrow morning, bright and early. I think it's at 8 a.m. So there it is right there on the banner. But tomorrow, wish me luck. Hope I don't die. And thanks to my sponsor, Mystic Luna. Now I'm going to do a little push for my Patreon project. The Patreon project on for Scarefest Radio, my Patreon project, is growing. We're adding a lot of content. You're going to have, of course, the blog that I've been posting, but we are going to, I'm adding I'm trying what they call a short form podcast. And Patreon subscribers see that or hear that first. Then I've added a podcast. Go over to that. Gussied Up Magic. The wonderful 3 Appalachian witches are going to do a podcast for me. The new podcast will be coming soon. We're going to start recording in the next week or two. And my Patreon subscribers get first listen. They get advanced listen on that. They even get to watch the live version of it. What's the matter? Oh, I see what's going on. Just skip that one and go on down to that one. Okay. Now, the Enchanted Forest event was a hit, absolutely hit. The next Mystic Luna event coming up will be Caribbean Carnival, February 15th, 2025. Plenty of time to plan, but mark your calendar. MysticLunaEvents.com. Excuse me. And the Central Kentucky Mystical Market coming up in August is the 18th? Yes, Sunday the 18th, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Mark that on your calendars. And that's our announcements for the night. So yeah, I'm trying. What happened to Chad? We lost Chad.
There he is.
Sorry.
And
It's all right.
yeah, and why is Chad on my screen? That's the next question. What? Oh, he moved. He flipped around. You gotta, yeah. Chad, do not lose your internet during the show. It messes up the production.
You need to panic.
Yeah.
Well, keep your fingers crossed. It's in and out around here, too.
Mine went off right before the show tonight. This went dead. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. But anyway, here we are. Now, let's talk about your presentation, Charlie. By the way, welcome back, everybody, to Spearfest Television. Guest night is Charlie Romans, and your presentation attachment, haunted places versus haunted people. What is the gist of what you're speaking about?
Well, the gist of it's this. You do have locations that are so charged that anyone can pick up on things. But you have to remember, people are electrochemical organisms. Some people, and I compare it to electricity, but some people are so connected that they draw in this energy. And rather than them going to a haunted house, this person themselves is actually haunted, because if they go to several different locations, you or I may go with them and not experience anything, but they will every single time almost. And then a person like that is more attuned, it's more easy for an entity to attach to them and follow them. So that plays out. And I think that in a lot of cases, it's more the person, if not, in fact, the entire family line, that's susceptible to haunting, rather than the fact that they just end up wandering into haunted locations. And it's been played out numerous times throughout several different podcasts. And people will say, I experienced this, and there were this many people there, and they didn't experience it. Well, then when they left that location, this entity followed them, and they started seeing this entity in other places. So, yes, I do believe that it's easy for certain people to become attached. And, I'm not even talking about like an extremely negative force, like, say, for instance, demonic entity. That's an entirely different thing. But some people are more susceptible to, or more sensitive, we'll say, to spiritual energy, and can make that connection much faster. So it's easier for the spirit to attach.
And now I'll tell you another thing. This is from the old days when I used to ghost hunt. I used to tell the team that I was with, and would tell people I was with, do not go ghost hunting if you have so much as a head cold. If there is any weakness to you, if there's anything that's messing up your mojo, your aura, if you will, ghost hunting is not where you need to be. I do believe that, in other words, physical weaknesses and mental weaknesses, for that matter, can actually open up that for a so-called attachment.
What's how to get one too?
I need to fix my Instagram feed. I've got Charlie. I don't know what happened. Oh, that's because Chad screwed everything up. God.
Chad and his internet.
Okay. So, Chad, over to you.
Charlie, I don't want to get too far into your presentation because I know everybody wants to come and see it. So I'm going to come back and talk about your podcast just a little bit more before we move on. If somebody has not been listening and they wanted to really get an idea of what your podcast was, is there an episode you would direct them to kind of get a good taste of it and try to get them addicted to it?
Well, see, that's kind of difficult because I won't say that I necessarily have a favorite episode, but there's something that I'm attached to about every episode. But the best thing to do would be go onto the website, and there's a brief description before each of the episodes. And if you read that description, it gives you some sort of insight into what this person's going to be talking about and what they've experienced. Now, it is a limited teaser, but as far as just wading right into it, Wes mentioned the episodes. Actually, there was 2 episodes with Jeff Duty. Now, it's very easy to listen to, and it flows real well. You can get an idea of how it works out. And he's experienced in quite a few things. And then another episode, a lady who's been on several different paranormal shows, and she's somewhat of an experienced authority on the subject, is Sandrea Mosses. She's from UK, and she's a psychic medium, and she goes into all this, and she shares some of her stories. This will ease you into it. That's a couple of good episodes to start with.
I do find that as I listen to the episodes, your episodes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they tend to run about an hour and 15 minutes is yes. What a lot of them are. But for some reason, and it says a lot about the way you do it, I never think I've been listening that long. So I was flying this week. I was flying this week and downloaded 7 or 8 to get caught up on some back episodes, and by the time they were over, I was thinking, well, I've only been listening for 20, 30 minutes. So it really draws you in the way you do it. And like you said, you let the people tell their story and you try to draw it out from them. So it really becomes engaging to hear the people tell the story from their own perspective without a whole lot of interruption or prodding. Is that an interview style that you came to naturally, or did you cultivate that?
Well, yes and no. Okay. For one thing, I've always liked to talk to people. And no, I'm not blowing my own horn at all, but I like to talk, but I like to interact. In other words, I don't want to sit down and talk to you for 30 minutes and you not get to say anything. It's like, hey, let's hang out. Let's talk about stuff. And it's back and forth. It's like my presentations at Scarefest. I talk about things, and then I ask the audience, hey, what was your experience on this? What do you think? Because I want it to be interactive. I want people to enjoy what they're doing and at least be informed. And I kind of, in a way, I waded into that more as I interviewed people for the newspapers. I've been doing that for about 15 years. And I realized early on that if you just fire questions at people, their eyes glaze over and they sort of answer the questions, but you don't really get information. So from that point, I started thinking, well, okay, tell me a little bit about this. So they say a few things, and well, tell me a little bit about that. When you pull people out, it's as simple as this. You can tell your story much better than I can because you know your story. It is your story. I wasn't even there. I'm coming in on the tail end. So I need your information.
Well, like I said, it is a entertaining style to listen to, and it does draw you in as a listener. And like I mentioned earlier, it's nice to hear regular people's story. So many podcasts focus on the experts and the authors and people that look at it from theoretical side, where it's nice to hear just your average person giving their story of their experience without being running through that filter.
Right. I agree. And it's average people will surprise you on how much they actually know. You say, Robert is an expert in this field. We expect Robert to know everything he's talking about. But you may be talking to Stephen over here, and Stephen actually knows as much as Robert does. And so it'll surprise you. Once you talk to people, let them share their information. And I've had people tell me, offer information I didn't even think of. You're talking about it terrified me, and the hair stood up on my arms and the back of my neck, and my dog didn't even move. So they were wondering why not, and that struck them that it affected them so strongly, but not the animal, or the other way around. So, and that's what firsthand information gets you. And if you're just firing questions at people, you'll never get information like that.
Absolutely. We've come up on our last break here. I'm going to go ahead and toss a commercial. We'll be back in a minute with Charlie Romans.
Treat Studios is a Scarefest weekend sponsoring Bender. Trick or Treat Studios is the one-stop shop for high-quality Halloween and horror. Shop masks, costumes,
figures, collectibles, games, and more from your favorite movies. Find Trick or Treat Studios online at trickortreatstudios.com.
Joel Robinson Art is a Scarefest weekend sponsoring vendor. Joel Robinson has been the official Scarefest weekend artist since its beginning in 2008. Joel is a movie cover artist and a Universal Monsters artist. Visit Joel for posters, canvases, t-shirts, purses, and backpacks. Visit Joel's Etsy page at joelrobinsonart.com.
Hey, Scarefest, this is Joe Lewis of Bonehead Weekly with another review. This week, we're going to do something that's exclusively streaming on Shudder, and it's called Satanic Hispanics. Now, this is a movie I actually wanted to review last year, didn't get a chance to, and in full disclosure, tonight, which will be a week or two before this actual gets played on Scarefest TV, I'm interviewing one of the directors and the producer, Mike Mendez. Now, sometimes you have to go into one of these and you have to, I wouldn't say pretend you like it, but you have to find the things that you like because you're trying to interview someone and you don't want to dismiss all the work they've went into, because making movies is hard. Whether you like them or not, somebody put in a lot of effort into them. I don't have to do that with this. I actually really liked it. It's not flawless. A couple of the stories are not, one of them is a little too abstract for me. But what works really works. So basically, it is a Hispanics bent on an anthology horror film. And they all kind of take place. There's an opening scene where somebody's arrested, and he's called The Traveler. And this is directed by Mike Mendez, who also produced the whole thing, but he directed the wraparound called The Traveler. And we're at a police station with an old, I shouldn't say, but an old acquaintance of mine, Greg Grumberg, was one of the detectives, and interviewing him. And then he starts to tell these three stories. The first one is about a dad or a son in a house, his mother's house, and how he accidentally summons kind of ghost demons. Pretty good, actually. The middle one is a little bit more abstract. I think there's a lot of cultural things that I don't necessarily get that I can't wait to ask Mike about. And the third one, I laughed my ass off. I really did. I don't know why. It just worked for me. It worked really well. And it's a horror comedy, the last one. The first two, not so funny. A couple of funny parts. And the last one's hilarious. Also, I really liked the vampire one. I completely glossed over that. That's also a horror comedy. But I really like that one too. But the last one, I just was chuckling the whole time. I liked it. The wraparound, even though it's low budget, it does a good job of covering most of it. It looks pretty good. It looks like they spent some money on it. And I don't know, it just works for me. Not all anthology. It does have the one problem that most anthologies have. It's like, oh, one of the two of them are good and one of them two are eh. This one, I think three are pretty good and one is just a little more abstract and harder for me. But they're all really well done. The acting's really good through it. It I would usually complain that it's an hour and 50 minutes, but it didn't seem like that long. And it's perfect. If you have Shudder, I do recommend it. Go out and watch Satanic Hispanics. It's on Shudder, like I said. If you have it, great. And check it out. I mean, first of all, some of it you're going to be mad because some of it's subtitled because it's in Spanish. But that being said, watch it. Enjoy it. Get some cultural stuff out of it. Like I said, I really like the movie. So Satanic Hispanics, check it out on Shudder. This has been Joe Lewis. Oh my God, I can't wait till you watch that fourth segment. And what's the? I'm giving too much away. I'm giving too much away. I actually really liked it. I really like it. I don't have to fake it with the director when I interview him later. So this has been Joe Lewis, Bonehead Weekly. Check out Satanic Hispanics on Shudder.
And welcome back, everybody, to the final segment of Scarefest Television. We're sitting here with Charles Romans talking a little bit about, we've talked about your podcast all night, so shameless self-promotion. What is the Lee Ward episode? Samantha was in the chat room, and she said that's your number one on YouTube podcast.
Okay, now we recently converted all the podcasts to YouTube, so you can go on YouTube. Some people were saying that they were having difficulty listening to them on certain platforms. So now Lee Ward, I actually worked with Lee Ward when I worked for the Daily Independent as a reporter, and she had some people go in, paranormal investigators, and her home is actually haunted by the spirit of her dead husband. And it was very interesting story. Well, yeah, it would, but it's kind of a comfort thing because actually it sounds kind of like me if I was haunting a place. She smells coffee everywhere, and utensils are moved, so I'm in there eating and getting a cup of coffee. If she smelled cigarette smoke, it would be me.
Well, let's hope she doesn't want to date.
Well, yes, that's true. That's it. She does date. Wonderful lady, and she's had no problem on that front. But she shares a very direct story, and she has a lot of information, and she's an interesting individual and very believable and very very clear and concise about things.
I'm still hung up. Of course, I'll try to go back and listen to that one. The Jeff Duty episode that you mentioned, I love that episode. This guy, to give everybody a quick synopsis, basically he works for the park system, and most of his stories that he was telling was around Greenbow State Park.
Yes,
and I mean, they were actually very, very in depth, and he told about how the other people that worked at the park, and some of them he finally just got like me, just tried to avoid them. In other words, there's a ghost in the swimming pool.
That was actually the second episode that Jeff was on.
Right.
The first episode he covered being working at a group home and all the experiences there. And in both places, it was like these entities were just trying to get his attention. But I've asked him on numerous occasions. He said there's no attachment. Nothing has followed him from either location. But it was really a serious experience at both places.
I can just imagine a group home and what kind of energy that must produce.
Right, and you're absolutely right. Because these are juveniles, and typically juveniles are the ones that generate poltergeist energy, for instance. But this stuff stored in this home for decades, and before it was a group home, it was actually a tuberculosis hospital. So it's hard to tell what is in that building. And one thing he described to me, this glowing, vibrating circle, it sounded like a portal was trying to open in this place. So I would like to have seen that firsthand.
Absolutely.
Now that's interesting. I've only ever had, matter of fact, I've only really think I've ever had one psychic tell me that they saw something like that. And they asked me what it was, and I said, well, it sounds like you saw the event horizon.
Yes.
Of a portal.
Well, see, and there's numerous guests in the podcast describe things, and it sounded to me, sometimes I've mentioned it, other times I've not, but it sounded to me like what they were seeing was a portal, something coming through a portal or exiting out of a portal, which adds a whole other dimension to the paranormal.
Just to close the show on a judgmental note, how often do they tell you about their orb photos?
About their orb photos?
Yeah.
I don't get many of those. People will mention seeing lights, like the one gentleman who was hunting. He saw several lights, but it seemed to be more along the line. I would have think the old will-o'-the-wisp legends, where people follow these into a bog and drown and everything else, than it would be actual spirit orb.
That's interesting because I forget what I was watching the other day, or I think it was maybe even listening to a podcast, and 50% of the person's story was talking about the photographs they had taken, and I just wanted to pull my hair out. It was that was, but I did not hear any of that in your podcast, so I don't want to imply to anybody that's where I got it from. But no, so I was just wondering if that does come up, and because that's one of my eye roll moments.
People have mentioned them, but like I said, for the most part, it seems to be along the lines of, and then I saw these glowing lights.
Yeah, when you see them, it's different.
Yeah. But, it's, we talked about earlier, the lack of empirical evidence. That isn't empirical evidence. Anything that somebody might think can be duplicated or fabricated is questionable, kind of, because people aren't going to accept that as real.
Now, Reed, I'm talking recently. Have we gotten any updates on Dogman? I haven't heard anything out of Dogman for a while.
We don't, but I am working on it. I have a couple of people who've reported things like that. One of the episodes with Carl Felty, as a fact, is the gentleman's name. He reported seeing, when he was younger, what appeared to be a juvenile Dogman. And I have a line for it to interview a couple of people about their experiences with Dogman. We had one gentleman who was talking about a camping trip with his family, and he stepped out of his tent to use the bathroom, and he saw one of these things relatively close. So there is some in there. But I think a lot of times what happens, especially if it's from a distance, I think most people that actually interact and see a Dogman, they misinterpret it as a Bigfoot.
Yeah, I thought that
they
too.
would be the similar size, So unless you got the full-on look with something, you wouldn't really be able to determine, especially in the dark. And you never have these creatures come out and say, "Hello, I'm Sam the Sasquatch," or "Hello, my name's Warren the Werewolf." It really, they're fleeting glimpses. One of the most terrifying things I've ever read was by the book by John Keel, The Mothman Prophecies, where he says maybe transmogrification, transmogrification actually does happen, but the only people that witnessed it firsthand didn't survive the encounter. So really, you can't tell grandma that you saw a werewolf if you're actually bits of you hanging in the tree. So maybe,
But yeah, of all the cryptids, that's the only one that scares me. That's because the stories never, there's all, and maybe, put that together with what you just said, maybe that's why the American Bigfoot is more violent than other people's Bigfoot, because it's not Bigfoot, it's Wolfman. Dogman.
Yes, that's a possibility. And what you said earlier, my wife and I discussed this. Okay, her most terrifying monster is the mummy, because no matter what you do, you can't get away from it. A lot of people say, "Ooh, vampires." No, vampires don't scare me. I'm not afraid of anything I can talk to. Okay, but werewolf shows up. What's your your go-to? You gotta try to hit it with a gun, or beat it to death with a silver-headed cane. Doesn't care if you're packing a crucifix or holy water. You can't keep it out by locking the door. It just tears the wall in. So to me, the most terrifying monster would be the werewolf, because it is so visceral. And if something's 9 to 10 feet tall and weighs probably a good 800-900 pounds, it's really dangerous. You need a Gatling gun full of silver bullets, really.
Well, that's assuming that the silver bullet myth is.
Well, yes,
it might be the werewolf in London thing. It just needs a bullet.
Another old myth is that a bullet, any kind of bullet blessed by a priest, will kill a werewolf. Or if you draw 3 drops of blood from its head with a sword, it'll cure it of lycanthropy. All these legends. I ate these things up when I was a child.
I still fall on the side of, like, vampires. You can, or zombies. We'll go zombies. Zombies. You shoot them in the head, which coincidentally is a way to kill damn near anything. Okay, everybody.
Yes.
We're at the end of the episode. Charlie, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight on relatively short notice. More than I've given a lot of people, though. So. And everybody, now, quick teaser. Next week, Adrian and I are in Knoxville, Tennessee at CreepyCon. We're planning on doing a live from CreepyCon. That'll be 8 p.m. It'll be an hour earlier because they close the doors at 9 and I don't want to fool with it right then. So just so you know. But yeah, next week we're at CreepyCon and we'll try to give you some updates there about what's going on with Scarefest. Thanks again, Charlie. Thanks, Chad. We'll see you next week.
Good night.